This reality is a realm of contrasts. It has to be for us to use what we've got, which is to compare one thing against another and decide for ourselves about things. Or we can just stay neutral and observe. So for example, you'll have black, you'll have white, you'll have up, you'll have down, and so on. You'll have hot and cold. So let's go with a little thought experiment here. I don't care what you believe in about this reality, what you consider it to be, but for the purpose of this, I'd like you to think of this reality as being like a computer game. The reason being that I'm suggesting this is it possible to play any computer game where there is an adversary or some sort of challenge or some sort of obstacle to overcome? Is it possible to play that game, and would there be any point in playing that game if you could overwrite the program and take the adversary out of it? What would we actually be left with? Would there be any reason to play the game unless there was some sort of challenge to it? So now to put this in the context of this reality, you've got what, for all intents and purposes, we're going to call the hidden hand. It's the hand that does not like to be seen. It's the hand that does not like to get its own hands dirty. Now the irony of this is most people have no clue who they are themselves, let alone the hidden hand. This is the irony of it. You've got your true self, your essence, which is contained within this vehicle called a physical body, basically your avatar, and it operates unseen, and yet you have the imitation of the hidden hand, which is operating unseen. And the bizarre part about this whole illusion is this hidden hand does everything to convince and program everybody to think that they are this false persona, the thing that you'll find on a birth certificate, a piece of paper. It's called stationery. It's called stationery because it cannot move, because it has no life of its own. It's like the word person. It comes from the Latin persona. It's a character, basically. It's not the actor or the actress, but the role that is being played. And this, after all, is a world stage. Oh, talking of which, now here's another irony. I would have known nothing whatsoever about this except for hearing a discussion on True Love live on Sunday. And apparently there's some, well, I've no idea what is going on, but there's the usual speculation of World War III, and when you've got a good story and a good product that you can make money with, you can speculate and get a huge return. I mean, it's probably just going to be another update of a certain group who can then wail at the top of the voices about being persecuted again. But of course, there again is an outside false persona that is being used as basically a human shield around something else. And of course, the entire focus on the Middle East is by a design to take you away from a point of origin, although that does have a point of origin. That is the whole reason for the Great Pyramid of Giza being situated where it is. It's basically the center of the remaining land masses. And not that long ago either, really. If you want to know the actual ins and outs of the chronology, I suggest you go over to Archaic's channel and look at the Phoenix phenomenon, the Phoenix cycles of every 138 years. You've got all the chronology there. There's no point even debating. It's pretty watertight, and you can take the blueprint of it and it works. You can apply it to your own life. You can apply it to many events, things that you may have a greater specialist knowledge on, and you'll find that you'll have exactly the same play out of isometric markers, palindromes, and repeat patterns. What I find fascinating about this reality is how this neutral field will interact. What do I mean by that? Well, this is something that Yolanda has talked about quite a lot actually, about how the television and the radio are interactive, and if you have the ears to hear it or the eyes to see it, you'll recognize what is being presented, and some people will brush it off as being mere coincidence. But it isn't just television and radio. I found that various channels or various videos just seem to land in my lap, as it were, either as recommendations or happen to see them on the homepage of YouTube. And of course, it's not just YouTube, it can be any social media. How beautiful is that? That all you need to do to enable this is to be able to talk to yourself. And what I mean by that is the dialogue between your conscious mind and your inner power and wisdom inside you. You'll know that as your gut feeling. And you'll know exactly how that feels individual to you. I can only give you my perspective on this is when you get a feeling about anything, a particular feeling of something's not right, or whatever it happens to be, whatever that feeling is, that is your internal guide that is talking to you. It's called intuition because it's happening inside, and you are your own teacher and your own student. But the key to being a good teacher is being able to communicate to the student. And of course, this all happens within oneself. So the key is to be able to tune into your gut feeling, which effectively is your higher self. The problem with a lot of these terms is when we say higher self, higher is generally accepted as being when you look up above yourself. But when we're talking about something that's in the unseen, obviously that the physical side of it doesn't apply. It's higher self it's your true wisdom. It's your personalized aspect as a representation of the Creator, effectively. The gut is the So that would be like your father principle. Now the sun, the S-O-N and S-U-N, is from your solar plexus. That is the gut feeling, the God feeling. It's one of the biggest clues you're going to get, or that I found that you can get, is the etymology, which is the etymology. And you'll notice within that word, etymology, you've got the word my and you've got log. And the log will tell you why. Make a mental note, as it were, of certain things with the etymology. Let's give you an example of that. What about, I don't know how many have heard the expression, you know your onions? It's an interesting one, that one. Now, how well do you know your onions? In the physical sense, as a vegetable, they're very good. And they're renewable. I've made a few shorts on this, just as a little side note, how you can use the base and suspend it over water and it will regenerate, put out new roots, and you've got the start of a new onion. You've got a clone of the original onion. Rather than throwing that base part and even the top part away, you can reuse them. But anyway, know your onions. So let's put it this way. You can get white onions, you can get red onions, and you can get brown skin onions. And all year round, and they come in bundles of abundance, are spring onions. So you could say you have an eternal spring. But let's go to the etymology of this. Now, if you didn't know how to spell it, onion, that would sound like it should be spelt as U-N, un-e-on. Now, you could spell it as E-O-N, U-N-E-O-N, onion, I suppose. But obviously, it's not spelt that way, because that spelling is pronounced as union. So let's have a look at the way onion is spelt. It's O-N-I-O-N. That's interesting, because you've got sort of like an I, which is an isometric marker that's right in the middle. And you have two ons. So knowing your onions, maybe that would be, we could see the one on as being the sort of the devil and the other one as being the angel. And of course I sit right in the middle. Quite an interesting thing. And this whole thing with these 27 characters, the alphabet, just from that example you can see how very cleverly it is thought out in what it reveals when you start looking at these characters, the way they're strung together, the spell that they create. I'll give you another one of these. What about the word truth? Now look what's right in the middle of that. That's you. But of course, you've got, to the left of it, you've got Ra. And to the right of that, you have T. So you can be stuck. You can be stuck in a rut. However, when it is embodied between, on the left of the T, which is capital I at its highest form, giving you the T shape of that letter, that character, and what is often associated with it, particularly in English, and as a prefix to such words as thee, thy, thou, which is references to this omnipresent creator, You have the letter H, which, if you think about it, in its capital form is like an 11 or two pillars, and it is linked in the middle. It is, as much as anything, it's a representation of when one cell starts to split and form two cells, and that little bit in the middle is the bridge. And then when you breathe in, that bridge will break, and you've got two cells formed out of a cell. And off on a slight tangent here, I believe, if I remember rightly, it's something like 4 years. Every 4 years, you totally renew. Your physical body that you find yourself in totally renews. But at such an imperceptible rate that if you see it on a daily basis, you rarely notice it. But then when you put a period of time as an interval, so for example, someone you haven't seen for maybe 10 years, you would notice the difference. But if you saw them every day, it would only be by comparing back to 10 years ago, or maybe seeing a photograph from 10 years previous, that you would say, oh wow, that person has changed. But it is something that is inevitable. If you think about a young child, maybe 2 or 3 years old, and then look at 3 generations on from there to great-grandparents, and look at that child and look at that sort of ancestor, and it seems incredible that the one is going to turn into the other, pretty much the same, not necessarily identical, but the body and everything will behave in the same way. It will grow, and then it will start to go into a decline, maybe sort of end up with a curved spine, or not being able to stand up straight, that sort of thing. But you've got this change, and this is one of the biggest blind spots with humanity, and not just on one thing either. It is so easy for people to assume that land and sea do not change, and yet they are constantly changing. Humanity is constantly changing. The humanity of, say, 700 years ago would not think exactly the way humanity thinks today. The human brain has developed, from going with the established history that we're told. If you consider, say, from 1900, the sheer number of introductions of things, particularly now we've come this side of, say, 1950, and you've got the early forms of computer coming in, that to the point where now you have these virtual games and things, almost lifelike. You've got computer-generated art, and how humanity's brains and the way they think is completely changing compared to what they were before. That's only in 120 years. So when we're talking about 700 years ago, consider how humanity would have changed in that time. Probably the easiest way to look at this comparison is through art. So, for example, look at what is given to you as Egyptology, the art and the way pharaohs and the like, and various humans and things are depicted, the way they're drawn, and the way the styles changed, particularly with the one they call the heretic pharaoh, Akhenaten, who introduced a new style. The mummified remains of Ramesses the Great doesn't seem to look exactly like the sculpture of this Ramesses the Great, as a side note. But then when you come through the Dark Ages, as it's called, the medieval period, you'll see that this sudden change in art with the likes of Leonardo da Vinci, and then you've got these books from the 16th and 17th and 18th centuries, and you've got human anatomy, very accurate as in sort of lithographic print, and it makes you wonder how we've got this sudden, in a very short period of time, how the art has changed, which to me is an indicator that the way human thinking has changed. I would refer you to Rudolf Steiner to find out more about this, how humanity is not the same as it was 700 years ago. The frontal cortex and the individuality, the I part, when we discuss ourselves as an individual, is a very recent development, this whole frontal cortex, and a necessary step. You could say you could call it the Luciferic principle that has brought in intelligence. And in many ways, it has come at a huge cost, in that you now have this situation where you have knowledge and learning have become something that is achievable through repeating memorized scripts without questioning whether the validity of anything that is being then regurgitated. So you end up with this situation that the majority of humanity will look up to the very people who are perceived as being intelligent, and yet the irony is they totally lack any wisdom. There's another expression of this divine comedy, and how much this realm is one of duality and contrast. I didn't know how this was going to go with this video. I didn't know where this was going to lead, but yeah, so the layers of the onion. So you've got the two ons with the eye in the middle. So when you peel back the layers and you get to that core, in the word onion, it is I. And that's basically representing the spine, where this unseen energy within oneself, the thing that ideally you want to be raising up, this Kundalini rising experience that I hope you will go through. I hope you're not shy away from it, and the best saying is get over yourself. And in its truest sense is, don't let your lower I self, the one that believes it's this from this country and identifies with this or that nation, and then has this feeling of I've got to defend it. I've got to do my duty and defend king and country, or president and country, and whatever. I would talk to people who've been in the armed forces and the way they're treated by their own governments when they come out of the armed forces, to understand how highly they're thought of, not. Anyway, to getting back to the point here. You have this realm with this perceived duality. Now, as part of that, you've got your unseen true essence that finds itself in these physical bodies. And part of the challenge of this game is to discover who you truly are. And it is not some legal fiction, it is not some nationality, it is not some religion, it is not anything you believe in. it tells you quite clearly in the Bible that God is no respecter of persons. Persons are the false persona, that non-living identity that is attached. As a side note here, a lot of people would be put off by the Bible and say, oh, the Abrahamic religions are something that's foisted upon us, that's fictitious or whatever. Again, I would say, let's go back to the analogy with the land masses and how coastlines changed and how human thinking has changed. What you've got is a situation where you have this usurper energy. This is the adversary that is the challenge to overcome in this game, that has got hold of the script and has rewritten it very badly, because it's full of contradictions if you read it as a literal story, as if it was something that really happened in history. It's actually a spiritual history. It's an interpretation to explain things in metaphors, in parables, and in fables. It makes that quite clear if you look in the right sections. I think Paul's letters to Corinthians makes reference to it. That, don't ask me the numbers and things, but even that, think about the numbers, and the chapter and verse numbers. There's no accident to those. Even that has a design behind it. So there was a time I would have dismissed the Bible as being evil or whatever and made a judgment on it. But there's always been that something inside myself that said, no, hold on, there is something about this, but it's not the only way of showing it. And what you'll find is, you may not agree with this, but you've got to look beyond the superficial level to things. Pretty much every film, every book, every story, every interaction you have every day, come to think of it, will be reflected somewhere in the Old or New Testament. Doesn't matter that those books been removed. What the core 66 books that you're left with in these Bibles of today, you'll find if you can find the right story that's contained within that, you'll find that you're playing one of those roles. Now, a big one, and it's funny, this is another example of the sort of duality and how things are twisted. This whole mindset of the only way to do better is to work your way out of it, do more hours, earn more money, get taxed more. The only thing you'll be earning is a quicker route to end up in an urn, probably. Just be wearing yourself out. But, I've lost my train of thought. This is the way it goes. It'll come back in a moment. The system gets you continually doing. Here's the perfect example of, you've got a story in the Bible of a flood. You have a flood today. Bear in mind that the main assault is through the mental. So you have a flood of information to overload all the senses, and it's a continuous bombardment. I don't know if you've noticed, if you go in pretty much any shop these days, there's always music playing. It never used to be like that. And you have to wonder why. Well, hopefully you have the thought processes to be able to formulate questions like that within inside yourself. It's a bit of an irony that pretty much most people these days seem to have a mobile phone and an internet connection on it, and you could just use Google, and if you don't know something, just type in what is, and then whatever the question happens to be, whatever it's about. and it will give you an answer. Whether it's right or not, that will depend on if there's some perspective or agenda to push a certain storyline. You have to use discernment with all these things. And of course, with the internet, it can all change at the touch of a button. But the conundrum is that most people don't seem to be able to formulate the question in their mind, to be able to put into the phone, although they've got the device there to hand. Now that's something that's just that's come into my mind. It comes from the Bible. God is closer than at hand. And look what's happening with these mobile devices. Most people have got them in their hand. And there's always speculation of this half human, half AI machine hybrid thing that, oh, let's not have a device in the hand, let's have it built in under the skin. That's the sort of storyline that's often pushed. And you can see that, well, hopefully you can see the patterns of, you've got a natural and a supernatural order to things. But then you have this imitation version, this plastic version, that is using that as a blueprint, but then playing it out in a sort of an anti-life version of it. And I still maintain that this reality is a diagnostic zone. This is not, I would say, the real Earth. I would say this is a carbon copy of Earth, of a real Earth. But it would make sense. This is something I've touched on before, and this is something you can see in everyday life. You buy any product, you'll find that it will have been tested to some degree to make sure it works well enough to sell it. But these days, most things have planned obsolescence. It's because this world is run on a business model, so after a certain amount of time, the things will wear out or fail, or in the case of most things that are plastic, they will go brittle and shatter. That is by design, because they want you to come back and buy another one. So from a business point of view, that makes perfect sense. And if you can just stand back from everything in life and know your onions, and just stay neutral to it and see what's on and what's on, and just see that this is actually really interesting. You may even come to the point of, instead of saying, I don't want to be here, I don't want to come back here again, you might say, this is actually absolutely fantastic. And it might be, I want to go round again. Just a few thoughts there. So yes, you've got this hidden hand, but how it operates is to manipulate humanity by offering suggested scripts. And then it's humanity, through its negative default programming, that actually enact these things out. And it is the perfect divide and conquer, because it encourages you to attach to certain identities, be it nationality, religion, or whatever belief or opinion you have about things, and then defend those. So if somebody doesn't hold the same opinion, or doesn't believe in the same things that you believe in, or support the same team that you support, then you've got to sort it out with conflict, rather than agree to disagree. And then the other extreme, you've also got this whole idea of you're supposed to love everybody, you're supposed to like everybody. But ask yourself this. Ask yourself this question in two ways. Firstly, with social media, out of these alleged 7.5 to 8 billion people, exactly how many of them, even through social media, do you have any contact with? How can you love everybody when most of them you'll never even see, let alone get to know? So it doesn't matter whether you like or dislike them. It becomes irrelevant. It's just stay neutral to it. Now the same question, but without internet and social media. Now, how big is your circle of people that you see on a regular basis or on an occasional basis, but those that you interact with in any form. Could be passing somebody on the street and saying good morning, for example. So out of this 7.5 to 8 billion alleged population, what percentage of those do you actually have any real contact with? Just a few thoughts there to mull over. And yes, this world does come with challenges. And as a final note, I am struggling financially because I have not so far come up with a solution to try and generate money. I'm doing all I can with the growing, so there's a lot that has been replaced, but there's a lot of things, like these buildings need a bit of renovation, a bit of tidying up, make them look a little bit better. So need bags of cement, need paint, need paintbrushes, need rollers, all these sort of things. So I'm appealing for donations, or within a few days we're actually going to be able to have a postal address. So if you'd rather gift something, but I would check the weight if it's something that's going to have to be posted internationally, because that can be quite crippling. But I'd be equally happy to receive gifts rather than a financial donation, because it all helps. But as much as anything else, I refer you back to the video called An Open Invitation I made a few months ago. That still stands. If you can get here to the Algarve in Portugal and you wish to experience off-grid living, it's an open invitation just to come and sample it and see what it's actually like, because from the conversations I've had with people, most seem to have a concept based on the familiarity of what they know. But this is so radically different here, you would not believe how completely different it is. As a case in point, if I was to see somebody walking along the road with a mobile device in their hand, looking down at it while they were walking, that would look extremely odd here, because that is something you just don't see. You rarely see many people here. It's beautifully quiet. So as much as anything else, if you want to get away from all the noise and chatter of that outside world, ideally you can just switch off the radio, switch off the television, and switch yourself off from it and just see it as stories. But if you wish to sample off-grid living, if it's something you've never done before, and find out whether it's something that appeals to you, the only way you're going to know that is to actually do it. Be under no illusions, it's not even an Airbnb. It's pretty much sort of fend for yourself, really. But many hands make light work, and I could really do with some extra bodies here to help with projects and things. So if you'd like to get involved, please do get in contact by email. The offer is there. It's rent-free while you're here, and say 2 weeks to a month, whatever you, as sort of an initial trial, if you wish to sample it, and then we can discuss with existing community members how that would then develop, because obviously you've got to consider the dynamics of everybody that lives in the community with these sort of things. It's not about making autocratic decisions. We don't operate in this community like that. We have a discussion about things where it's things that involve all the community. So it's openness and transparency with things. That's another thing. It's the opposite of what the hidden hand does, basically. So Anyway, we're, well, close to 40 minutes, so I think that's plenty to sort of ponder over in this video. Hopefully it's given you something to think about this reality, and how there's far more to it than the superficial level. And if you can get past that veil of that superficial, what does open up is actually a beautiful experience. Yes, you have an adversary, or a perceived adversary we can call the hidden hand, but it has to be there. Otherwise, what would be the point of playing this game? What would be the point of going through this, gaining experiences, finding ways around things? This is why I say it's a diagnostic zone as well. It's contained in a small area. It works like a factory with a production line. The production line is at linear time. And it's all about testing. I mean, the theme of mandatory testing has been has reared its head in recent years, I seem to recall. And the continuous bombardment of, well, basically very negative and fear-based stories is very much a test upon your true self to rise above all that and not be sucked into the machinations of this hidden hand, and then being used as a pawn to enact it. That's the worst part about it. Humanity is being played by this hidden hand to work against itself. It's just a shame that more people can't see that. But it's a process of experiences through life which will lead you, hopefully, to actually see that for yourself. Don't take my word for it. I don't want you to take my word for it. It's not about following somebody else. It's about seeing it for yourself. Acknowledging what your gut is telling you, basically. Your gut feeling is your God feeling. The key is to open that dialogue within oneself, with all aspects of oneself, to know whether the information is true or not, because you'll know by the feeling if it is or isn't. You don't need any physical evidence, you don't need anything from the material world. It doesn't work like that in the unseen. Your own gut feeling will tell you all you need to know.